welcome to the Phil Lewis podcast. We are back with another great episode for you. And just a quick reminder that we're also available now on YouTube. So if you are listening to this, but you have a preference to watch your podcasts, well, the link to our YouTube channel is in the show notes. Please feel free to go there and subscribe. For this month, the last in our current series, well, of all the episodes we recorded on this podcast, I hate to say this one is my favourite because I'm not sure with some of the ground we cover in this particular podcast, favourite is really the right word. But this is certainly one of the most insightful and moving episodes that I believe we've recorded. In the first half, I am joined by Lysa Holdstock, who has a story for us about what happened when she built her business, sold a business, and, well, I'll leave you to discover the rest for yourself. But suffice to say, it contains many, many lessons for those of us who are interested in leadership. In the second half of the episode, I'm joined by a therapist called Sandra Stein. But we'll get to my conversation with Sandra in a bit. For now, here's my conversation with Lysa Holdstock. Lysa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Phil.
So here we are talking about leadership lessons, as always. Is there anything that, when you look back over the course of your career, strikes you as a time in your business life that you learned a challenging lesson from in some way, shape or form?
Well, where to start? I mean, there's obviously several aspects, but I think the real learning for me, and this does obviously reflect where I am today, is around you don't have all of the answers. And I think this is the thing that as a leader, you always feel like you need to, whether you read books, whether you do some training, you're always trying to educate yourself and get as many answers as you can. But there are times where you have questions, and whilst you're able to potentially answer questions for others around you, you don't have those answers. And I think the thing for me is, how do you surround yourself with the right people? Because it's really easy to go with the people that would agree with everything you say rather than those that will actually challenge and make you think a little bit differently. But there are so many lessons to be learnt, and you don't have to learn them all the hard way.
So take us back then to a time in your career where that lesson started exerting itself and needing to be learned.
So it was around about 2014, 2015. We had grown the business substantially. I mean, we started, to give some context, we started the business in 2008.
What was the business?
It was a brand experience field marketing agency.
Okay.
So effectively, we put people out for large brands to ensure that, you know, those brands made their way into consumers' hands and could be purchased.
Oh, it's okay, like in train stations or in big event kind of things?
Yeah,
or,
so
okay.
for the likes of Monster Energy, we would be at big events, you know, or Relentless would be down at Nuki, the Boardmasters, you know, that kind of thing. But there was also, you know, you needed to actually be in Asda or Sainsbury's and popping them on the shelf so that after you'd tasted them, you could then find somewhere that you could purchase them afterwards. And there was a particular time where, you know, supermarkets weren't actually very good at stocking their own shelves. So lots of brands paid field marketeers to go in and do that. So, yeah, that was the business, and we started it in 2008. Over a 7 or 8 year period, we built it literally client by client. We started with Kodak back in 2008, and by 2016 we had the likes of 20th Century Fox, William Grant and Sons, Monster Energy on the...
Are we saying this was you leading the business with a small team? Or?
Yeah, so I was leading the business. I always stepped into that role as, you know, MD, CEO. I had a co-founder who had equal shareholding in the business with me, but he was very much more sales oriented. And I also had a very small amount of investment. So yeah, we took that when we started. And the team, by 2016, we were 250 people. So
you grew rapidly then over 7 or 8 years?
Yes.
How did that feel? I mean, that sort of rapid growth can be massively challenging in and of its own right.
Well, I think this is the thing that, you know, when I do look back, my background was always marketing. I absolutely loved coming up with ideas and putting them into action. And the reality is, in the last 5 years of running that business, I didn't do any of that. when you've got a team of 250 people, you are busy dealing with HR issues. You are looking at your company culture.
100%.
Everything is people related in some shape or form. I always wanted to be kind of a great place for people to work, for us to be, really open, really transparent, and to grow together. Really was the ethos back then. But I found myself really in that space of only thinking about people rather than actually thinking about strategy and growth for the business.
Okay, so you've grown massively. It's 2015, 2016, 250 people, presumably a whacking great payroll at that point in time, but real success. So what goes on?
Well, I mean, when you mention payroll, that's an interesting one, because just a couple of months before what we'll come on to talk about happened, we had one client that thought that we might lose them. They sort of turned around and said, we're potentially about to be purchased. We may not have control of our contracts after this, so we'd like you to know so that you can start to ramp down your team. And I remember at that point in time, that would be the first time that we would have to take a step back. And despite the business being successful, we certainly hadn't built up a massive surplus of cash. We didn't have the opportunity to kind of preserve those individuals as we then moved forward. And that was probably the first time that I was left with that real uncertainty, because I'd actually never had a business plan. Never once had a business plan. So the idea then of, okay, what do you do apart from potentially trying to fill the hole with a new client, left me in a space of a lot of unanswered questions, not feeling very confident, and just generally feeling quite anxious, to be honest. So we were part of the European film marketing group, and that was basically 22 agencies around Europe all came together to discuss agency challenges, and sometimes to also pitch together as well, because you might have a brand that was looking for a European or a global pitch, and we'd be able to pitch and be able to manage that kind of intercountry. So I was a member of that, and they were actually approached by a big VC firm that was looking for global domination. They wanted to buy a number of brand experience and film marketing agencies across Europe. And obviously the quickest win for them was to go to one central point and for them to be able to pick up 22 agencies.
So you're feeling a little shaky. You've had this great growth, but something's come along that's felt maybe a little bit destabilising, with the client news about them backing out, and suddenly a VC lands. Okay.
Exactly. So a VC lands. This sounds really stupid and really naive now saying this. I really had no idea what a VC actually did, what they were, what they would ever be in it for. I just knew that obviously they were interested in my agency. And it's probably just worth putting a little bit of a backdrop in that, in terms of kind of investors and co-founders, those relationships weren't probably at their peak strength either. When I had felt that I needed the help, they hadn't been there for me to go to.
Okay.
So it felt as though there's a bit of a convergence of kind of events that suddenly sort of came together, and then you've got this VC making this offer. And 5 or 6 of us were interested and started to take those conversations forward. And what happened in the UK was that the VC invested in a pharmaceutical company in the UK, and then the pharmaceutical company took the funds and then invested in us.
Interesting.
It was interesting. Again, they were buying a number of agencies, all that were kind of marketing related, but they wanted to create an end-to-end kind of brand experience.
Yes. Okay. So you are then in a world where been a bit shaky, but actually VC comes along, going to drop quite a bit of money on the table, perhaps give a bit more security, because that's what's been missing as well. Let's continue. Yeah.
I mean, security was absolutely the biggest thing that I was looking for. It was obviously, an offer that we hadn't planned for. It kind of, whilst I say it came out of the blue, obviously this was over a number of months, and we were courted. We were very, very, very heavily courted.
Right.
Yes. I kind of sit there and think, God, we spent about a year working on due diligence, which in itself is a really hefty process to start to even work through. And yes, the offer got put on the table. And effectively what I was looking for was for the others to exit and for me to be able to take the business forward. So in terms of shares, I think I sold 3 shares personally, but everybody else sold their shares with an exit plan. And what we had been courted with alongside that investment, was the fact that actually the businesses themselves had loads of clients, that somebody would be put in place to actually really manage the opportunity, and that we would come together. And it was that whole, that whole Dragon's Den piece, like 30% of nothing is nothing, but 30% of taking your business to 50 million is quite significant. And I guess there's absolutely no doubt when I look back now that I was very drawn to the idea that actually we could become a really big agency.
Okay, I'm feeling. I'm feeling it. Like, yes. Let's carry on.
Let's carry on. So, maybe we'll just fast forward to 24 hours after the paperwork was signed. And
exhausting due diligence process, as these things always are. Get it over the line, probably with some sort of awful 24-hour long lawyers thing where everybody's keeping the fees right up to the last minute.
Yep.
Get the thing signed. Hallelujah. Your co-founders and other people on the board have now got their money and will go.
Yep.
You're there left with a minority stake in the business.
Absolutely.
24 hours later.
24 hours later, I was sitting in their offices, and we were working through our 100-day plan. That's something that had been agreed. You have to understand that obviously I needed to tell my staff. My staff didn't know anything about this. A few of our clients went through due diligence with us. So that afternoon, I'm sat in their offices with my leadership team, with their leadership team. Obviously, I've told my leadership team this is the most amazing thing to happen, and we are, going to go to a place of great heights. And again, for a little bit of clarity, whilst we were turning over about 10 mil at the time, there were agencies in my world turning over 150 million. Other than perhaps having a plan in place, there was nothing to stop that being achievable for us. That was the really big goal. And when I left that room, my first phone call was to my lawyers, asking them if they could reverse the deal.
What happened in that meeting?
There were a number of things. So firstly, probably how I was spoken to in front of my leadership team, which was completely different to anything that I'd seen in the 12, 15 months prior. Things that we had agreed were suddenly definitely no longer happening, and things that we had never spoken about now were happening.
God, that must have been horrifying. Imagining you sitting in that meeting, and imagining, and I've been in meetings like that, where it feels like whatever this meeting was supposed to be, whatever we are supposed to be to each other, it's like a veil has dropped and something else is there, and to have that kind of that sense of unspooling in real time that I think accompanies that must have been extraordinarily difficult to sit through.
I can even feel it now as I talk to you about it. The coldness, the blood, I felt that it was literally draining from me. I couldn't actually believe that I was in the right meeting. It was almost for a couple of minutes.
Surreal.
Very surreal. It's kind of like, where has this come from? I've got no idea. And even down to, I'll give you a basic example, is that this business had a very large overhead cost centre. And what they wanted to do was to distribute that equally between all of the parties that they'd bought. Now, by doing that, they were instantly making their own business far more profitable, obviously ripping all of the profit out of mine. There was no way that I could afford to take, for example, £50,000 towards HR. We didn't pay that as a business anyway. The way that we'd always set ourselves up was to be extremely lean, to outsource, to have freelancers, to have to pay.
Well, you have to in that world.
We really
have to in that world. Yeah.
So I guess I was going from how you would operate as as SME versus how you then needed to operate in part of a much bigger corporate organisation. But those things had never been, we obviously touched on, we will pay a small contribution to this, we will do X, we will do Y. But actually when that unravelled and suddenly you start to get those huge costs through.
But it's also, as you say, it's how you're spoken to. So what I'm hearing in that is, what was it? Coldness, arrogance, hostility. I mean, what was coming across there?
I mean, the hostility was evident. It was from a particular individual. I need to be
Right.
really clear and
No.
say, whilst there definitely was a very different culture to ours, and I had not seen that during, during that courting period, I mean, for want of a better word, it really was the boys' club. And I felt that I had been transported back about 15 years.
Right. It's really interesting that you talk about it as a courting period, by the way, because it does feel like one of those awful things you might read about in some, old sort of novel. Someone gets married, and then the day after, it's like you wake up on the morning after the wedding. It turns out you married somebody completely different to how you thought you were marrying. It feels like that listening to you.
It's exactly that. And, one of the things that I talk to founders about so frequently now is it should have been more of a courting period. When they do their due diligence on you, actually, I should have been doing it in reverse. That is probably my key reflection, is that I should have been doing that in reverse. What I went on to experience, I was not alone in that.
No.
I was not the only person to have ever experienced it.
So you're on the phone to your lawyers,
Yeah.
and you're going, get me out of this deal.
Yeah.
And presumably the lawyers are then telling you a whole load of things that you're not going to enjoy hearing, but give us a sense of what's going on.
I mean, the lawyers basically said that the money was transferred this morning, the deals were done, there is no way back out of this. You're in it, you need to kind of make the best of it. And obviously, Lysa, if there is something that you don't feel aligns with the shareholder agreement, come back and we'll happily fight that for you for another, the
800 grand. Yeah,
the clock
sure.
is ticking and that money is piling up. So of course, they're very happy to continue to look at a shareholders agreement, but that wasn't a place that I was in.
What's that old phrase? The law courts like the Ritz are open to all. Yeah. So,
Yes.
Okay. So that must have been a really lonely, difficult situation to be in. You're trying to get out of a deal. You realise there's no way out of a deal. So where does it go from this point?
Well, unfortunately, it only went one way, which, was horrendous. I mean, there's no other word to describe. My husband always says that I use those particularly descriptive words. It's like, there is no other word for this other than horrendous. Any meeting that I had to attend, I mean, I wouldn't sleep the night before. I'm not a particularly anxious or stressful person. Things don't overly concern, or didn't back then anyway. But I would be awake for hours trying to get myself in the right mindset for what I was going to face, but almost trying to second guess what I might face, so that I could already have every answer, every armoury that I might possibly need. But in reality, it wasn't ever needed, because the idea was almost make sure that I am completely off course, caught out, exposed, that I wouldn't have anything to come back with anyway. If I walked into the meeting, a comment would be made about my appearance. A comment would be made that, oh, wow, you look really nervous today. You've obviously got something to be worried about. The scene was set every time I walked into a meeting room.
It's set to destabilise you,
Yes,
by the sounds of it, as much as possible.
Exactly.
So you've got some really old school dominance hierarchy stuff going on here.
Yeah.
That feels like it sounds like quite gendered as well. That if you said it's an old boys, an old boys club that you're walking into, that feels like that was kind of present. Okay, so how does this sounds like extraordinarily stressful. So how does this then continue to play out?
Well, this thing continues. We used to have a conference every year. This was my first conference after we'd been purchased. It wasn't. I had done a conference with them previously, so I would also say it's my first one, but first one after purchase. And we caught a bus over to the location. We were abroad, caught a bus over to the location, and I had many of the other founders that had also been purchased. And
were they having a similar experience to you?
No, they weren't.
Oh, interesting.
Probably because they were male and they were slightly older than me.
Right.
And I'm going back, 10 years now. So
sure.
I was a little bit younger than I am now. But they knew what I was going through. And, they would sort of say, right, when we sit down, you come and sit with us so that you're not left. And then what actually happened on that particular evening, somebody was sat next to me before the dinner started. They actually got up and moved. And this particular individual that really didn't like me then came and sat right next to me. And he obviously asked me how I was, whether I was enjoying the evening, and I said yes. And I had I had somebody else that worked with me who was a managing director, really amazing girl. Really, we'd been friends for a long time. We had a good working relationship. She was probably about 5 years younger than me, and she'd kind of, I wouldn't want to say followed in my footsteps because that would be wrong. She's very, very capable of walking the walk herself. But I had placed her as MD into one of the agencies. She was wonderful. But this guy turned around and said to me, "Oh, look at her. She's absolutely beautiful, isn't she? She, you must feel like you're the old mother. She's the young daughter, and you're the old mother standing next to her." And I literally couldn't speak. I kind of thought,
that's exactly the reaction I'm having listening to
why,
that sat here.
in a business environment anyway, even though it's over
I don't care about that, like business or not.
Why would you? I wouldn't say that to somebody that I really didn't like.
No.
I mean, obviously, really didn't like me, but I would never. Those kind of words would never come out of your mouth, and particularly again, to a female that is growing older. Those kind of connotations are just absolutely debilitating.
It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. Anyway, carry on. So,
well, I mean, I don't even know how I got through that night.
No,
and I have to say, there's a lot of this afterwards that, I have, for my own sanity, have had to try and blank out.
Sure.
Because that's an example of those types of comments were being made daily, weekly, monthly. Every time I was in a meeting, and she was always in the meeting with me because we were part of a team. But if you can imagine, you almost start to dislike somebody when it's got nothing, it's not her fault, it's got nothing to do with her at all, but she's being used in that way.
Yeah, well, they're playing you off against each other in all sorts of ways there, aren't they?
They are, yeah. So not great. I obviously start to take a step back, really start to take a step back.
Well, emotionally at this point in time, I would imagine what's going on for you is self-protection mode presumably starts to kick in, a degree of I just need to de-invest from this in some way, shape or form.
I had to close down.
Of course.
I couldn't be at that stage emotionally. I couldn't be at that heightened fight or flight.
And you, of course, still have a shareholding in the business at this point.
I still had a significant shareholding in the business.
But there's no... And what I find really curious about this is that if we think about it is in their interests as a VC that you, as a significant minority shareholder in that business, should be fully motivated to make the business a success. And actually, you should be, at least in theory, aligned in aims and objectives, even if there could be disagreements around strategy and everything else, I suppose. So I find that curiously self-defeating behaviour. Anyway, I'm sure we'll get onto that. But so you start to disassociate and pull yourself back from the business. What happens?
I mean, when I say pull back, even to the point where I would sit there at weekends kind of thinking, do I leave? Do I leave at this point in time? And, Phil, I started this business. I came from council estate background. I left school at 16. I had a baby at 19. I never, ever saw myself as being a founder in the way that I was. And I almost started to go through that doubt of maybe I was never meant to have this. Maybe I'm really not very good. That whole imposter syndrome had completely set in, that I thought maybe I am just getting what I deserve. So it became a very, very toxic space for me.
We try and make sense of the world, don't we? And we try and make sense of the behaviour sometimes that we find ourselves on the end of. And in the absence of any other explanation, sometimes it can be very easy for a lot of us, I think, to start going, well, the answer must be me, at least in part here, And of course, the answer is often quite complicated, and we can play roles in all these things in different ways and all the rest of it. But yeah, that must have been profoundly challenging. So,
I mean, I think the only thing that I was able to do, and this was only for a very short period of time, was kind of put the armour on. You know what? I kind of put the armour on, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to come for you, and I'm going to come fighting and kicking.
Good for you.
You say good for me. But I think when somebody is as much of a narcissist as they were, that was probably, I don't know whether it was the best thing or the worst thing I could have done. I was at home. I'm trying to think how long after. So in total, this was probably about 12 months.
That's a long year, then.
It was a very,
That's
very
a
long year. It was a
Yeah.
very long year, yeah. And our profitability decreasing. So I'm kind of looking and sitting there thinking, well, you know, my shares that I'd hoped would be growing and worth X are diminishing.
Presumably you got Brexit going on as well around that time. Is that about right?
That was just no, that would have been
after.
just after.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have been just after.
Okay, so carry on.
Yeah, we weren't. I mean, thank God I wasn't actually going through that at that.
Because that really shook that industry as well, of course.
It did
it?
a lot.
So,
Yeah, very big.
Right, carry on.
So I was at home. The doorbell rang. It was a Friday morning. I will never forget it. I opened the door. A postman is standing there, and he hands me a letter. And the letter basically terminated me and gave me my notice.
On the grounds of?
On the grounds of that I was not performing, that several attempts had been made to engage me and to bring me into the company, and that my behaviours had demonstrated that that wasn't something that I wanted.
And where did this leave you as a shareholder?
Well,
'Cause that's quite a staggering way to behave towards someone who's a significant minority shareholder in a business that they'd actually founded as well. So this is not, you're not just an employee.
no,
So
I'm not an employee. I should say that in this time I had been called down for a meeting and told that it was, forgive me, I can't remember the words, but kind of off the record.
without prejudice.
Without prejudice.
Conversation, yeah.
You know, and asked me a few things, and I talked about, you know, my hopes and my dreams for it. I had shared very, very openly the challenges that I was having with this individual. And I had shared that with, you know, the most senior, from the HR to the CEO. I had that meeting with them. So I had assumed that by having that, and they didn't deny that they didn't know about this either. I mean, in that meeting, one of them actually said something, the CEO sort of said to somebody, look, you can probably help her a little bit here. And the guy turned around and said, really? That's like pouring, you know, oil onto flames. There's nothing I can do to help her in this. If you want to change it, you're going to have to do that yourself. So these conversations, it wasn't an unknown. But what I didn't expect was that letter that just completely removed me from my position.
So what happens next?
I was back on the phone to the lawyers.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing. I obviously had to accept my 6 months' notice. I had been terminated. There was nothing that I could do to go back. And actually, Phil, if I'm honest, nothing that I wanted to do. I felt that it was a living hell. So why on earth would I want to be back in it? If they felt that the only outcome was for me not to be there, then that was probably the right thing, because all parties had exhausted it. So yes, we went into a very long, lengthy legal battle that my lawyers absolutely assured me that we would win. When I sat with them for hours and went through everything, and it basically came down to bullying. You know, what it came down to is bullying, and actually bullying is not recognised in the UK courts. And therefore, because it isn't, what we went forward with were things like age discrimination, sex discrimination. You know, they didn't follow due process to get rid of me, but that was almost, you know, that was kind of a little bit by the by. That was a secondary. And I took the claim against both the company and those senior individuals within the company. So I think there were 5 claims in total.
And your lawyers absolutely assured you you'd win?
Absolutely, 100%.
Why do I feel there's a but coming?
Well, there is. I mean, the but was that during this time, because the legal battle actually took about 2.5 years. There was, you know, really long, lengthy waits for court. So, you know, this was quite torturous. And initially they just sort of said, you know, for these first 6 months, you're obviously been paid anyway. You just need to keep your head down. And, you know, and then they sort of started to explain to me, well, you can't really work. You can't really do anything. I'm like, well, if you do, this will go against you in your court case. You won't be awarded, blah, blah, blah. So I spent a couple of years not really working. I, you know, took a little bit of time to hone my photography career, which was great, but that can only go so far. So we weren't working. As it transpired, it was a time that we were looking to sell our house, and we then went into rented accommodation. Because we had gone into rented accommodation, what that meant was that for the first time ever, we had a bank balance. And we were able to use that bank balance to keep paying our legal fees, because these were really stacking up. We were just, by the time we finished, we were just over £250,000.
Good heavens.
Yeah. And what they said to me, I remember the final week in court, I had to have a barrister as well, which was another 24,000 on top of what I'd ever anticipated. But of course, you can't stop. You're in it. Right? There's no way of stopping the train. You're on it.
Cost as well. You've spent $100,000, so what's an extra 50?
Yep. And you know you're going to win, so no big deal. And even again, I remember the guy that I was working with in the legal team, and he kind of said to me, "Don't worry, if anything goes wrong, I will take care of the bill." Well, I mean, everything that went wrong could go wrong, and I still don't fully understand it, if I'm honest. I remember each day I would meet with my legal team at the end of the day, and there would be certain things that they would needed to have ticked. It's like, did we get X over the line? Did we get, yes, we definitely said that. So it's like, right, day 1, we won. Day 2, we won. Day 3, absolutely knocked it out of the park. We won. And this was 7 days. And it was 7 really hard days, Phil. These were days where I was the first one put on the stand, and nothing can prepare you for that. Absolutely nothing. When you've got
hostile cross-examination going on.
Real hostile. And not only that, after you're then taken off the stand and others are put on, other people that don't even really know you and things that they are saying about you, and you can't respond in that moment. I mean, my barrister was literally getting post-it after post-it, not true, but he can't sit there and keep sort of turning around to me and asking me what's right and what's not. But you have to listen. It's like character assassination, and you listen to it day after day after day. And that only then builds on that point that I made to you earlier around, I'd started to think it was me anyway. So by the time this is going on, I'm really thinking, this is me. I'm obviously really rubbish at my job. I was obviously useless.
So we have 7 days of this horror show.
Yeah.
And
then we left that afternoon. My husband took me away. We went to the airport and we flew to Santorini.
Good for you.
So needed, the idea was, we knew that it would be hard. We never knew that it would be that hard. Landed that evening. Beautiful place. Went to get out of bed the next morning. I actually had no sight and I had no hearing. I had become, so stressed by everything that had gone on that my body was, giving out the impact of what had happened. Sight returned during that day, but very, very blurry. I had no balance. I couldn't get out of bed. And apart from maybe one afternoon, that's how I stayed for those 4 days while we were in Santorini. And it's pretty much how I stayed for quite a while after.
You must have been terrified. That must, horrendous.
Yeah.
When did the judgment come in?
The judgment, so that was May. The judgment came in August. We were just about to take our family on holiday. It was quite a big family holiday. We've blended family. We've got a bit of age gap, and we'd been through a couple of tough years.
Of course.
So this was a nice family holiday for us, and it was about 2 days prior when my lawyer rang. And I remember I was upstairs. We were actually about to move house as well. So I had all these boxes around, and I literally answered the phone. Hey, said his name obviously, and his first words to me were, "Lysa, I think you need to sit down." And I sat down, and then he told me that I lost on every single one. Now, what had happened, if you go and read all of the papers, this particular individual, they don't, obviously in a magistrate's court, they don't find anybody guilty, right? But they effectively did find him guilty of bullying me. But because he'd been able throughout his testimony to prove that he had done it to a male as well as a female,
That makes the discrimination claim fall away.
Yeah, the fact that he had done it to a younger male
Makes ageism fall away.
So all of those things, which I guess, again, it's that kind of thing that I kind of, because I did know that I wasn't the only one. But you have to, listen to your lawyers. You have to believe that they're taking you in the right direction. And obviously that wasn't.
That must have been an obliterating call.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember literally, the howl that came out of me and how I landed on the floor. I can remember it.
Well, it's been years by that point, and everything bound up in that judgment and everything else. I want to talk to you about the work you do now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also just want to sort of pause on that for a second and just ask you, when you look back at this experience now, because you've gone on to do quite remarkable things, and I do want us to get to the amazing impact you're now having. When you look back at it, what do you take from that experience?
Oh, what do I take from it? I mean, I guess what I now know about myself is that, you know what, there really isn't anything that can ever take me down. Because there were nights that I wasn't sure that I would see it through to the next day. And I did. I'm here. I'm standing. I can still tell that story. And I think
you do learn something about your own steel when you go through.
You do.
Things really, whether it's business wise or personally. I've been through very different things to you, but one of the things I always say I've taken out of my own life experience is you cannot kill me. I will be off that mat.
Yeah.
So I really connect with that.
I will still keep getting back up. It might not always feel as strong.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things, and I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but is understanding that nobody else does see things through your eyes. And therefore, again, when you talk to somebody and you try to tell them what's going on, or they can't possibly, they can empathise, but they can't possibly understand that experience.
Going through the kind of journey you went through, building a business, attracting venture capital, going through that courtship, going through due diligence, coming at the back end of that, realising that who you married wasn't exactly who you thought you were marrying. That's an experience that I think a fraction of people have in the working world. And it is unlike a lot of other work experiences. It is its own thing, that, and you do meet founders and entrepreneurs who go through it, but it's just a tiny, tiny minority of the working population. And I think there can be real challenges on how relatable actually that feels to people a lot of the time. And those of us who run our own things, we get used to what I like to call driving without suspension. But I think you only know what that feels like when you do that at speed for a protracted period of time. And what you went through there is, even by those standards, an edge case story. I mean, to have gone through that and to have gone through years and years of court case, extraordinarily expensive. It's morally offensive as far as I'm concerned that you found a business and you ended up in the position that you ended up in. And it's a really hard thing, I think, for people to get their heads around when they haven't been through it.
Yeah, it is. I think to actually look back and go back to your question, it took me a long time to recognise was that I was actually still a success.
Absolutely.
A lot of people, when you sell your business, certainly I did this as well, because I didn't have the bank balance to reflect the sale. And for a little bit of clarity, I eventually after that got paid £10 per share that I still own. So I still have the check. I never cashed it. There was no way I was ever cashing that. But when you don't have the bank balance to reflect almost the sale that you've gone through, I didn't realise for a very, very, and I mean a really long time, I'm talking till 2024, that actually I was still a success. What I had done was I had taken a business from 2 people to 250, from absolutely no revenue for 6 months to over £10 million. And that had grown over a 10-year period. We had won awards. We'd been chosen to be the European Field Marketing Partner. I had achieved a huge amount, but that success got buried underneath all of those, what came after.
It's a beautiful thing to remain connected to that. Just before we get on to what you do now, I mean, one of the things that you and I bonded over was a similar story in my own past. And I don't know if I shared this with you at the time, but when I ended up leaving the business I'd co-founded years and years ago, I always remember a phone call from my lawyer, which is I ended up leaving for £1, the notional value of my shares. And the lawyer said, "We have to transfer this £1 to you. Can I have your bank details?" Right. And still to this day, I have a print off of the bank statement that has the £1 transfer in it, because I'm just like, I'm never going to forget that, you know. I just want to talk a little bit about the work you now do, because talking about the lack of relatability of that story to a lot of people, I think anybody who's listening to the podcast who's founded a business or who has been through due diligence or has investors, or there's lots and lots of people out there that will relate. But one of the things that is so wonderful about what you've built on the back of the experience that you went through is what you're now doing with Cabal. So would you just tell us briefly about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is exactly the reason that I have landed with Cabal is because of what I've been through. And I want to ensure that no other founder ever feels either as lonely or as isolated or doesn't have the information that they need to make a decision. So what I did with Cabal was we set up in November 2024. I got 5 leaders or founders in a room together. I'd been working with them all in different guises, mentoring them. And I just knew that I was hearing the same things from each of them. So I kind of said to them, you know, get in a room with me. I want to try this peer-to-peer mentoring. I'd lost somebody in 2024 completely out of the blue. And I think that, again, for me was a bit of a moment that kind of said, you've got to seize, you know, the things that you enjoy doing in life, you need to make the most of them and you need to seize the moment. I'm not getting any younger. So I asked these 5 guys, and it's funny again, isn't it? It's still male, but these are very, very different types of very,
well,
very
we weren't
different
all
types
created
of
equal.
No,
Lysa.
definitely weren't. You know, we're all in the room together. I facilitate a conversation between them all in terms of where their challenges are, what's working, what isn't working, and how they can learn from each other. And effectively, we took that across London. So I think we have 7 peer groups in London now, all that have up to 8 founders.
And now you're going nationwide.
And now we're going nationwide.
And doing really well as well. And I think the interesting thing is that thing around the founder experience, right? The fact that those of us who do run our own thing, it does give you a very different perspective, and we can really learn from each other. But I think that point you raise about no one feeling lonely and no one feeling alone. I mean, founder and entrepreneur loneliness is absolutely chronic and becomes acute at times like the ones that you experienced. So the Cabal groups, I think, are 8, 9, 10 people, aren't they, in general?
They are 8 plus a chair. So the chair is somebody that is a little bit further on in their journey, that has had, you know, some relative experience or potentially has exited. And they are there then to facilitate the sessions and to lead that group. But yeah, there's 8 people in a Cabal. There can be a mix. People often sort of say to me, you know, how do you curate the groups? And in fact, we've learned quite a lot in the last 15 months, because we initially started by looking at 3 verticals. So we're going to be food and beverage, D2C, e-com, retail, and then sort of B2B service-based businesses. And actually keeping those verticals the way which we have hasn't worked so well for us. We just in January took a bit of a step back, removed the verticals, and have now pulled those groups together.
Diversity really helps, I think.
It really is the diversity. So, I mean, I'm a chair. That's my favourite day of the month when I go and chair my Cabal. And, you know, to give you a feel, I've got a founder in there that's probably turning over about 250k, right through to a managing director that's turning over 6 mil, and then an individual that has got the most amazing tech business that is kind of washing its face at the moment. It's not necessarily profitable just yet, but actually they will sell for multi-millions, and he's my youngest member.
And that's the joy of it, right? I mean, people learn from each other and they learn to trust each other. and they learn to. So when you're going through the kind of experience, God forbid you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, would you? But when they're going through the kind of experience that you described, there are people to talk to. And there are probably people in a group like that who would say things like, you might be one of them, don't go legal. There's a different way out of this, So I just want to say to you that of all the many conversations that we've recorded for this podcast, that's one of the ones that has touched me most deeply. I think it's such an incredible story of just how brutal behaviour that we witness in business can be, and also just what it will take from us sometimes, the experiences that we go through. But the thing that I admire hugely about the story that you've shared also is, and I recognise this, or I try to recognise this a bit in my own life and career as well, is the trying to turn that into gold, because the coal that you go through sometimes becomes the diamond if you allow it to kind of compress in the right ways. And I think Cabal is the most extraordinary expression of a positive intent coming out the back of an experience like that. We will put links to Cabal in the show notes and all the rest of it. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you. I know so many of our listeners will find tremendous value in that story, and thank you very much for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thanks for the invite, Phil.
A huge thanks there to Lysa for sharing with us so openly a story of such a difficult time, not only in her leadership journey, but also her life. Very grateful to you for doing that, Lysa, and I know that our listeners will be too. Several months ago, I had the privilege of being able to deliver a TEDx talk in Paisley, just outside Glasgow. If you've not seen it yet, we will stick a link to the talk in the show notes. During that day, I met some wonderful speakers. Included in their list was a lady called Sandra Stein. As soon as I met Sandra, I was drawn not only to her professional knowledge, but also her warmth and charisma as a human being. Sandra comes from a background in psychotherapy, so a little bit different sometimes to the kind of coaches and consultants that we have in this second half. But I wanted to get her on to try and just give us a bit of a different take. And our conversation really delivers on that front. Over the course of the next half hour, we talk about concepts like existential wounds, and also what it means to forgive ourselves and others for the things that happen in business. So some really interesting lessons here drawn from the conversation that Lysa and I had. And I think they'll be valuable to anybody who's not only interested in what it means to lead well, but also what it means to live well. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Sandra Stein. Sandra, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me.
I tell you, regular listeners to this podcast will know that I always get affected in different ways by the first half conversations that we have. And I would tell you, as an opening reflection from me, when I was sat there recording that conversation with Lysa, I found myself genuinely enraged by a huge amount that had happened there. And a sense of kind of real sadness as well around it, but anger being the kind of dominant emotion and the dominant kind of colour in that conversation from my perspective. And I've got, I guess, some thoughts as to why that is, but it was just interesting to kind of note that as a response. And I was curious, what was your sort of response to it when you heard it? Similar or different?
I would say similar, and I must say, listening to her, it was like watching a novel. And interestingly enough, you mentioned the word novel when I felt so in sync with what was going on between the two of you. And I felt really sad to what happened with her, to her, but also angry. But also I felt a sense of pride when she was talking about how she went to fight for herself. Even though she had her own challenges on that journey itself, I felt, you go, you fight for what you think and you feel is right for you, because that response in itself it's so healthy. So I think I felt a collection of feelings throughout the interview, and it really touched me really deeply.
One of the things that, it's interesting your point about fighting. One of the things that I found myself reflecting on afterwards is when you face a situation where there's some sort of dilemma in your life, or there's some sort of issue in your relationships with other people, a choice that you have in life is whether or not we accept that, or whether or not we choose in some sense to stand our ground. And Lysa's story is a really interesting example of somebody who stood their ground and in one sense, and I think in one sense only, lost quite heavily, certainly financially, certainly in terms of her immediate kind of business prospects and so on. And so you can look back at a story like that, I think, and think, well, was fighting in that situation the right, quote unquote, thing to do?
Well,
And an interesting question, isn't it? Because where I'm sat anyway, it depends on the lens that one looks at that through. So for example, well, what she's gone on to do, which has been a direct response to that situation, may not have happened had she not gone through the particular experience that she had. Another way of thinking about it, from my perspective, certainly as somebody who's been through their own share of fights with others over the years, my business partner said something very insightful to me about 2 or 3 years ago. We don't know how this is going to work out, Phil, she said, about one particular dispute that I ended up in. Not that I ended up in loads and loads of them, I should just say, but, but she said the choice that might be the sensible choice to make is ultimately the one that you look back on and think, well, I did the best that I knew how to do at the time, and ultimately I did what I felt was right for me at the time. And I thought there was a lot in that. I mean, so that question about fighting, is it right or is it not? I mean, I just think that's really kind of present in that story,
It is. And, it's subjective, and every person reacts differently to an event in life. I personally, thinking as a trauma counselor, I personally think that fighting, it's always a good and productive mode to go to. Of course, it got its levels and an awareness of how far, how much, how valuable and constructive it's been to me. But if you think from the working frame of fight or freeze, when you freeze, there's a lot of stagnation that happens inside you. And when you fight, instead of freezing with those emotions and with these internal experiences in yourself, you're actually putting out there in form of energy. So from my point of view, I think fighting, again, within a healthy measured amount of it, it's a positive reaction.
So say more about that. So that strikes me as interesting. So from a kind of, if one's taking a kind of trauma-informed view of this, if I've heard you correctly, what you've said is, well, if we're doing something, in that case, if we're fighting, then we're mobilizing energy in some way, shape or form. We are actually taking action, and the taking of action, whether it works out in the way that we want or it doesn't, actually stops an alternate reality, which is that her negative experience, or in worst case traumatic experience, actually crystallizes through a lack of inaction, and then sits in our body, our mind, our heart, whatever else, and then needs dealing with, or else it will deal with us as those sorts of things tend to do. Is that an accurate interpretation of what you've just said?
It is perfectly eloquently, translated. And basically, one of the things that can happen is, I'm trying to give it an example, is when you express that energy out there in form of fighting, there is something unconsciously happening, a message, a monologue happening inside you that it is, I am worth the fight. What I have built is worth to be represented with love, with passion, with protection. And the opposite of it would be an internalization of self, which is, of course it went wrong. Of course I wasn't worth it. Who am I for good things to happen to me? It was too good to be true. I don't deserve it. And then you just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that becomes chronic. And that becomes what I call in my work frame an existential wound. It becomes an existential wound. And it in itself will be it will sort of express itself in other areas of your life and going forward in, other adventures, business adventures.
About 12, 13 years ago, I went through an experience that was in many senses different to hers, but had quite a similar outcome at the level of, certainly financially, it was a really poor outcome. And I ended up basically leaving and losing a business that I'd co-founded many, many years ago. I talked about it a bit in the TEDx talk as well, actually, that came out recently. And I tried to fight that situation quite hard and ultimately ended up not doing terribly well out of it. And actually, in the end, the money that I'd spent trying to fight the thing actually ended up being piled on top of the already punishing loss and all the rest of it. And yet, I don't regret it, because actually I still think to this day, I mean, it was a kind of moment from which so much other good things have kind of flowed in my life. And that's not to say, hey, it was all great, everything happily ever after. I don't think life's like that. But I do hear that point around, yeah, you stood up for yourself. And actually that was worthwhile. Whereas I wind back to earlier in my life and in my career where I didn't do that. And there were a couple of occasions where actually I genuinely was more sinned against than sinning, and didn't stand up for myself, and actually took exactly what you said, took all of that in, took all of that kind of pain and shame and everything else inwards. And I look back at it now and think that probably distorted my life and my outlook on life for years and years after. So just wanted you to say a bit more about this concept of the existential wound, Sandra, because again, that sounds perhaps not just relevant to Lisa's story, but I wonder if relevant in maybe other senses to people who listen to this podcast, or maybe they recognise it in others that they're working within. But yeah, can you say more a bit about that?
Just saying a little bit from chronologically so it makes sense. When I graduated as a counsellor, I graduated on humanistic, which is an approach that is dialogical, it's a conversation in the session, and integrative, which is drawing lots of, the appropriate school of thoughts and methods to each situation, each client, each presenting issue. And then working with addiction in a recovery hospital where I worked with love addiction, substance addiction, porn, and so on and so forth, I realized there was something missing, a depth that was missing. And that depth was the tools to explore why people do what they do. What is it they're escaping from? Which kind of internal map are they following? So I went on to study trauma work at Oxford University through this master series where the biggest thought leaders in trauma were that teaching professionals like me. And I went on to really be interested in how people tick, the way they think they think about themselves and they relate to the world. And I found a pattern in my clinical work, which is we all carry some voices inside us. And I spoke in TEDx, my TEDx talk about it, that we all have this quiet, sometimes unconscious belief about ourselves, a monologue about ourselves that could go like, I'm not lovable, I am not attractive, I am a failure. Some of us are not aware of these self-talks. You've got to go through a little bit of a introspection to find out. But the problematic point about it is how we adapt to them. So that the behaviors that become adaptive to how you think or you feel about yourself. And the emotional and the existential wounds is these thoughts that we have, these beliefs that we might be conscious or not about them. And then we have the adaptations, which is our behaviors from this self-experience. And assessing these two areas of our lives is where you can then reach to how can I change? How can I heal? How can I be more self-conscious, self-aware, in control of how my wounds are informing the way I choose relationship, the way I go in my career, the way I treat myself, and so on.
When I listen to something like Lysa's story, what you hear as well in a story like that is a tremendous amount of drive. You know, to build any business from scratch, whether it's a business you co-founded or whether it's a business you find yourself leading in some other way, just takes a massive amount of energy, determination, grit, all the rest of it. Really, really hard to do that, right? In any sense, I would say. And I also just think about Lysa's story here. I actually think about a lot of the stories we've featured on this podcast over previous episodes as well. And one of the themes that we've continually, I think, circled around in the conversations, and sometimes actually landed on both in the first half conversations and the second half conversations, is this idea of, in some sense, not being good enough. That actually there is something going on where this drive can come from a place of a kind of internal lack. But the other thing that happened for me, and I think it came out a bit in the conversation with Lysa too, it took me 10 years to start talking about what happened in my old business partnership in any way, shape or form. And my relationship with that, I think, was also then a kind of possibly an existential wound, shame-based sort of relationship as well, because actually it's almost like, well, all I've done again, I fought for myself in that particular situation, but I still took that failure on. I still took it in, and I still used it to confirm an internal narrative about myself. So, you know, I think these things take some unpicking, don't they?
They do. And she left school at 16 and she got pregnant at 19. And I thought, this woman is a fighter. She's gone through something here. She is not going to bow down. And I mean, surely then towards the end of the interview, that's how she came across. With what you said, I was thinking about this phrase I came up with that says the function of dysfunctionality, and I love it because it can be quite controversial. But it's the function of this dysfunctionality is basically what you described, which is coming from your wound, you can behave from it in a way that is a rescuing, is a coping. But it works really well for you. You know, it can work to a certain extent. It works really well. For example, I come from, you know, the north corner of Brazil, and I had a very, very humble beginning. And I work hard, and my drive is my fear of poverty, of struggle, of not having. And of course, there is the shadow part of it, which is I find really hard to rest and to relax, which is then something that I have to deal with, which is it comes from the emotional wound of if you don't do enough, you're not going to have enough. But also it works at my favor because I work hard and I help people in the process.
Again, it's a recurring theme on this podcast is the fact that the interrelationship between the kind of light and the shadow on all of this stuff, you know, that the things that harm us actually at the same time can bring very good and beneficial things into our lives. Another theme I felt was really present in that story, and I'm curious as to whether it came up for you, what you made of it, and is a theme around trust. I mean, I think most of us as human beings, we're quite trusting creatures, really. And anybody who's seriously into sort of sociology would tell you society fundamentally actually does run on trust. You know, like if you sit down in a restaurant and order some food, the restaurant's effectively trusting you're going to pay for it. And then clearly, if you don't, there's steps that they can take. But actually, in the end, society kind of runs on this underlying kind of current of trust. So Lysa's story, and so many that I've come across in business over the years, is a story of, I think, a real violation of trust, actually. How do we navigate through a world where on the one hand we need to trust, we have an innate need for relationship with others, and to believe that others are fundamentally going to do right, and then at the same time protect ourselves. Maybe the acceptance is sometimes we're just going to get hit and we're going to get hurt, you know?
I mean, I was reflecting about her story, because when she was sharing it, I felt like it was happening to me. I really put myself in her shoes. And that's why I was so immersed in it. And how do you go on without trusting? And then what is broken inside you when you have given your baby, which is your first business that you developed from scratch, and you raised it, you nurtured it, and you trust that someone is going to look after it, and they say to you, you don't need it, goodbye. It's that I can feel in my chest just talking about it right now, the heartbreaking and the breaking of so many things inside us that there can be. And you're absolutely right, Phil. Trust, for me, it's one of the link between humans. We need to trust each other. We live collectively. How do you give your heart to your partner without having a little bit of trust or faith that this person is going to look after your heart, your trust, the bits that you're giving yourself to them well enough? It's hard, because it's part of the living experience. It's what it is to be human. It's to build, break, rupture, and repair.
Repair sounds like such an important word there as well. And I think one of the things that I've been writing about recently, which is such a strange concept, particularly in the kind of business worlds in which I operate, is the idea of forgiveness. Which is to say, actually, in the end, I think we forgive others, not just for their sake, but for our own in the end.
Yes.
You know, that actually forgiveness is a gift we can give to ourselves. And to understand sometimes that what happens is the consequence of unconscious behaviour from others, not that they're not then accountable for that behaviour, but actually in the end that just accepting that they may not have been conscious all the time of that behaviour, I think, can be a path to forgiveness as well. And it's something that I think is sorely missing in the business world, you know, that actually it's just not a concept that gets talked about. You know, people don't deal with conflict. They don't process the experience that happens to them. They bury that then. A lot of the time, don't process that emotion, hang on to it. It kind of toxifies or calcifies in some sense. And in the end, what actually happens is that whole thing about, you know, swallowing poison and expecting the other person to die, you know, which I think is a sort of beautiful way of thinking about bitterness. But forgiveness takes time as well, doesn't it? You know, I mean, I think about my old business relationship too, and everything there. And again, I would say forgiving that particular situation probably took me about somewhere between 5 and 10 years. You know, it took me that long to kind of do the processing and to let it go. So that thing about how do we, exactly to your point, how do we rupture and repair? But it's like, how do we continue to open up when actually experiences like the one that Lysa had should, in all cases, logically speaking, get us to close down? You know, that feels like a sort of central kind of theme in that conversation for me.
Yeah, you're still doing better than me in terms of forgiveness. For me, it is. But it's
not a saint, Sandra. I shall tell you that.
I must say it's a beautiful, complex, and very delicate dynamic, because what I find is, if you really think about it, it's not about forgiving others. It's about forgiving the version of ourselves. Is forgiving how you have let yourself being fooled. It's forgiving how you criticize that part of you in the past, that how could you not have seen the signs? Is this talk that you carry on for a long, long time that needs forgiveness. Because in hindsight, I hear a lot of people saying, in hindsight, I should have done that. In reflection, I should have done that. And Well, you did what you had the capacity to do with what you had, with what you knew about yourself. You did what you could do with the version that you were then. Now you are who you are. Perhaps this person that you are today, wiser, repairing, and more knowledgeable, can have a chat with that younger, more naive, excited, fantasizing part of you and say, I understand what happened and I get you. And that's the thing about trauma work. Some people have this misconception that it is about other people. It's not about, it is about them because they're part of the story, but it's more about what was left inside you. That is the serious part of this whole thing, because you are the one carrying it into the future of yourself and into other parts of your life. So forgiveness and self-compassion, self-forgiveness, self-compassion is a must, is the way forward, is the repairing part of it all that I think particularly it's crucial.
That's really wise, and it really resonates as well. I mean, certainly in terms of my own internal narrative about what happened to me, and I think this is the point I was making earlier about I couldn't talk about it for years and years and years. I think what it was about was, you idiot. If I put it in suitable for work language, you idiot. How could you have got yourself into that situation where you were that vulnerable? And how did you not read this, right? To kind of come to terms with that in oneself.
Wow.
It's taken me a long time. And part of that for me was also about letting go of some professional ego ideals as well. And just one final thing I wanted to say, talking again quite personally for a second. The most helpful thing that was ever said to me about forgiveness was one of my old therapists. I've had a few over the years. and I was talking about a particularly difficult family situation, which I won't go into, but it was a really difficult one. It had gone back over years and years and years, and I had felt a lot of guilt and shame about my own part in handling that or not handling it, as the case was, but also very, very hurt by some of what had gone on and all of that. And I was talking about this for about 45 minutes in this particular therapy session, and you'll recognize this from your own work, the kind of the swirl of the thing that happens, over and over. And my therapist just said, what if you just forgave the whole sorry situation? And it was that, what if you just forgave all of it? What if you just forgave all of it? What if you just let it all, just forgave all? And as soon as I took it out of me, them, my contribution, your contribution, all of it, I just literally forgave all of it. And it just helped me to completely put it down. And in that moment, I put that whole thing down. And it literally lightened my kind of emotional load or whatever else, but I can't even tell you the kind of benefit I carried from it. But I think about that a lot in my work as well. What if you just forgave the whole sorry situation? Isn't actually a bad way to think sometimes, which is not to say on the equal and opposite side that people don't need to be held to account for, the mistakes and misdeeds and all of that kind of stuff as well,
I tend to think this way. Everybody's coming from their own blueprint. And when something happens to you, it's not because of you. It's because of them. It's because it's coming from a part of themselves that makes sense. It doesn't have to make sense for you. And believe me, I am still I will never be finished. I do my own therapy. I have my supervisions, and I'm always trying to grow and trying to heal. And the more I understand that how people treat me, it's because they're coming from their own internal map of seeing the world, of feeling themselves. Maybe they feel threatened. Maybe they don't trust people. Maybe they are avoidant to connection. And that's how they express themselves into the world. And unfortunately, I'm the one in front of them to receive all of that. But once I understand that is not because I'm not likable, it's because I'm not good looking enough, or I'm not competent in what I do, or I'm not wanted. It's because they are the way they are. The more understanding and compassion I have for human interaction. Not to say that we don't have to have boundaries. We need to have boundaries, especially to protect ourselves and protect the work that we do in ourselves. You've got to be protective of yourself. But the more I watch people from those lenses, the more detached I am from taking everything personally.
That's there in that story, isn't it? I mean, there's this sort of harrowing part of the story about the individual who Lysa experienced as a bully. And that was clearly, if I understood her story correctly, and if not, this is on me, not on Lysa, went to court, and one of the things that, the case was fought on was a degree of whether discrimination, so sexism, ageism, whatever else it was. And actually, no, it just turned out that this guy was just a horrible bully to everybody. And paradoxically, that was the thing that kind of got them off the hook, which is just an unbelievable example in and of its own right, actually, of just how unjust justice can actually be in certainly a kind of legal sense. But you do think about that, and you think about individuals like that, and we've, I'm sure all encountered really challenging behaviour. I try and think about behaviour, not individuals in general, and one line of inquiry, it's that old thing of, well, what happened to this individual? What happened to you? How is it that, exactly to your point about blueprint, I've ended up navigating through the world in a way that says my way of protecting myself and getting what I need to survive is to ruthlessly and relentlessly bully other people. That's what life has taught that individual in some sense, right? And so, which sounds like a horribly lonely way to live as much as anything else.
And then that's when self-reflection, meditation, slowing down, taking time in a day, in a week, as much as you can, to go within and have a chat with yourself is a way to keep yourself loyal to what is truly resonates with you and gives you that sense of inner peace, and what it doesn't. And hopefully we can find courage to put the boundaries between us and the things that don't work for us, and relationship and behaviors that don't work for us, and do something about it, and whatever that is, which is, just be more assertive or walk away, or because these hurting people that go on to hurt other people, only hurting people can hurt other people. If these individuals are living from neck to top, that's how life's going to be. They're just going to go with their adaptation behaviors, protect themselves, attacking to defend, and so on and so forth. If there is not an introspection and, okay, what is my part? How am I playing in this? Then we just feel sorry for whoever is the one on, the center of the bullseye for them, which in that case, sadly, was for Lysa.
Indeed. As we close out, there's always the same question I have for our second half guests, which is, what would you take out of this conversation, sort of one or two insights that have felt most present for you as you and I have been talking, and indeed as we think back over the conversation that I had with Lysa? I guess for me, Sandra, you and I have spoken obviously before this, and I will say to you, I think your work around existential wounds and how they show up, one of the reasons I was keen to get you on the podcast is that work like this often hangs in the kind of psychotherapy space. I don't think it finds its way into quite the business world or into the workplace quite as well as it might sometimes. But I feel there's a lot in that to examine around actually what really lies at the root of our behaviour as individuals and really getting interested in where we're seeing problematic behaviour in ourselves and others, going in search of those deeper explanations. I think that as leadership work as well as personal development work feels absolutely vital. So I would encourage listeners to this podcast to check out your excellent TEDx talk on this subject. And as I say, we will post links to that in the show notes. So I find myself thinking about that. And I also find myself thinking about your beautifully simple point, but really well made, around the real journey of forgiveness. Actually, a lot of the time is self-forgiveness. And again, how important it is to kind of do that work as a leader sometimes too. So that's what stays with me. How about yourself?
Yeah, I thinking about Lysa's story in itself. I'm just mesmerized with the fight that she has in her, and the courage and the resilience, but also this dance between people that can be, if we let be, can be quite destructive if we believe in some of these messages that that can be born from an interaction, a horrible, traumatic interaction with another individual. How these little voices, these emotional wounds that can come from any point in life, not just childhood. One doesn't have to believe on that and hold on to that and go on through life believing that they are a failure or they're not good enough. What happened to them doesn't have to be what they are. It can be one painful event, unluck, but you can be in touch with the beautifulness and the force that you can be through forgiveness, to knowing that we all can go through something like that, but it doesn't have to dictate how the rest of our lives are going to be and how we are going to live life.
Beautiful place to leave it. Sandra, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Huge thanks there to Lysa and to Sandra, both of whom gave so generously, not only in terms of their time, but also their insight for the recording of this podcast. So thank you, both of you. If you found value in the podcast, as always, we will ask if you could kindly like us, review us, particularly on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe, not only on your audio feed, but also if you're interested in being able to watch the podcast on YouTube. We'll be back with season 2 soon enough. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed these first 8 episodes of the Phil Lewis podcast. We set out to do something a little bit different to what you often hear in this kind of leadership work. And certainly some of the anecdotal feedback that I've received and the team has received over the last few months suggests that it's been a really useful and interesting experience to listen for many of you. And so thank you for doing so. Really appreciate all your support and look forward to seeing you very soon for season 2. In the meantime, bye for now.